The Atlanta sun doesn't warm like Asmara's. For Sen 8, the daylight filtering through the slits of his studio's thin curtains brought no warmth, only the harshness of yet another battle ahead. The air smelled of mildew, and the silent despair that permeated the walls. She stood, her bones protesting after a night on the thin mattress on the floor. Her almond-shaped deep eyes immediately fell upon her greatest treasure and her greatest vulnerability. Her 17-year-old son, Jonas, still asleep, with the soft features he inherited from his father, a ghost from her past. A hoarse sigh escaped her lips as she dressed in her cleaning uniform, a blue polyester that itched her skin. Every movement was meticulous, calculated to make no noise. She would fill the thermos with the leftover hot water from the previous day for Jonas's tea, leave the bread she got from the community restaurant wrapped in a napkin beside his bed, and leave before he woke. It was a protective ritual. She didn't want him to see the weariness weighing on her shoulders, the shame that sometimes burned her cheeks. The journey as an Eritrean refugee had been an ordeal of fear and loss, but life here, in the heart of the American dream, was a different kind of war. A war against invisibility, against the longing that ached like a phantom limb, against the constant fear that a mistake, an unpaid bill, an illness, could shatter the fragile roof they possessed. Jonas was a good, intelligent young man, but she saw the restlessness in him, the desire for things she couldn't give him, the frustration over a life that was less than the promises they had been made. He spoke of university, of a future, with a light in his eyes that terrified her. Because she could only see the financial abyss between that dream and her reality. With her back aching from cleaning 2 office buildings at night and her hands calloused, she left, closing the door with an almost unheard-of click. The city outside roared, indifferent. For Sen 8, this was not the beginning of another day. It was the next round of a fight for survival, where the prize was her son's future and defeat, a possibility that haunted her every night. She walked quickly, her eyes downcast, feeling the weight of the world on her thin shoulders. Each step was a silent prayer, a plea for strength to carry not only her own burden, but Jonas's as well. The biting wind seemed to whisper her deepest fears, and she huddled inside her thin coat, a woman alone against the icy immensity of a world that didn't want her. The sky was gray, promising rain, and Sen 8 felt a chill run down her spine. It was a premonition, a sign that the approaching storm was not merely climatic. She quickened her pace, longing to be back in the precarious safety of her small studio, where at least she could watch over her son, protect him from the dangers she knew lurked around corners, in empty promises, and in the impossible desires of a young person's heart. The rain fell with a fierce determination when Sen 8 finally returned home, her body a single point of ache. Water soaked into her worn shoes, and each drop that hit her face felt like an icy needle. But the chill she felt as she opened the door was deeper than the cold of the weather. Jonas wasn't studying at the small corner table, as he should have been. He was standing in the middle of the small room, wearing his best jacket, the one she had washed so carefully. His eyes, so like his father's, shone with an excitement that immediately put her on alert. "Mother," he said, his voice a little deeper than she remembered. "I need to tell you something." Senet's heart seemed to stop. She managed to articulate a, "What is it, my son?" trying to remain calm, as she took off her soaked coat, her movements slow and deliberate. Jonas approached, and she could see the determination in his face. He spoke of opportunities, of a friend he'd met online, of a quick job that would pay in cash, much more than she earned cleaning houses. "It's for deliveries, Mom. Just a few hours at night. We can save up for my college, to help you more." Each of his words was a stab in the heart. "What kind of deliveries?" she asked, her voice a whisper. "Where? To whom?" Jonas avoided her gaze. "Don't worry, it's all safe. The guy is trustworthy." Trustworthy was a dangerous word in the mouth of a teenager in a foreign country. Sen 8 knew the stories. She knew the dangers that lurked behind promises of easy money. She saw in that glint in his eyes, not only hope, but the naivete that could lead him down a path of no return. Night work, deliveries, cash. They were pieces of a puzzle that formed a terrifying picture. "No, Jonas," she said, her voice firmer than she felt. "It's too dangerous. I can't allow it." His expression changed. Hope gave way to bitter frustration. You never let me do anything. Do you think I don't see you killing yourself working? Do you think I like being a burden? I want to help. I want a chance. The argument intensified, voices rising against the sound of the rain on the window. He accused her of being overprotective, of not understanding his new world. She tried to explain about wolves in sheep's clothing, about the scent of danger that she, who had crossed deserts and seas, could feel in the air. It was an exchange of pain. His pain, of a young man trapped by poverty, and his mother's excessive caution. Her pain, of a woman who had already lost so much and feared losing the only thing she had left. In the end, Jonas locked himself in the bathroom, and Senate collapsed into a chair, her face in her hands. The rain outside seemed to wash away all her strength, leaving only a raw bone of fear. She wasn't angry with him. She was terrified. His desire for a better life, a desire so pure and legitimate, was about to place him in the crosshairs of danger. And she, with her empty hands and her heart full of scars, didn't know how to protect him this time. The gleam in her son's eyes was no longer the light of innocence. It was the reflection of a precipice, and she felt she was losing the strength to hold him back from the edge. The argument with Jonas echoed in Senate's mind like distant thunder, even hours later, as she walked to her second shift at work. The rain didn't let up, turning the streets into dark rivers of asphalt and reflected light. She felt empty, a shell moving by inertia. It was then that, under the broken awning of a deserted bus stop, she saw a figure. An elderly woman, huddled together, trying in vain to protect herself from the gale. Her gray hair was soaked, plastered to her pale face, and her shoulders trembled violently. She held a torn shopping bag, and her shoes were thin and open. Something in that woman's posture, in her absolute vulnerability, struck Senate like a punch to the gut. It was the embodiment of all her fears: loneliness, abandonment, the coldness of the world. For a moment, the survival instinct whispered to her to keep going. She already had her own cross to bear, her own son to protect. But then, the old woman's eyes met hers. And there was no plea, no lament. Just a profound resignation, a weariness of soul that Senate intimately recognized. It was the same look she saw in the mirror every morning. Her feet moved before her mind could rationalize. "Madam," she said in her hesitant English, with the heavy accent of her homeland. "Are you all right?" The woman shook her head, her purple lips trembling. Without a second thought, Senate opened her old bag and took out her thermos. Inside was the hot herbal tea she had prepared for herself, a small luxury she took to the night shift. "Here," she offered, placing the thermos in the woman's trembling hands. The gesture was small, almost insignificant. But seeing the woman wrap her hands around the hot metal, bringing it to her lips with an expression of relief so profound it bordered on pain, Senate felt something stir within her. She then took from her pocket the woolen gloves Jonas had given her last Christmas. They were her only good gloves. Without hesitation, she placed them on the old woman's cold hands. "For you," she said, her voice soft. The woman looked at the gloves, then at Senate, and a solitary tear mingled with the rainwater on her face. "Thank you, my child," she whispered, her voice weak as the rustling of a dry leaf. Senate didn't ask her name, nor her story. She simply nodded, a lump in her throat. That act, that moment of pure humanity devoid of any expectation, was a remedy for her own weary soul. As she went to work, leaving the woman a little warmer, a little less alone, Senate felt a strange warmth spread through her chest. The fear from the argument with Jonas was still there, but now it was tempered by a spark of hope. Perhaps, in a world where a stranger could show so much kindness to another, there was still a chance for her son. Perhaps protection lay not only in saying no, but in showing the way to yes to compassion. She didn't know it, but that simple act of kindness in the rain had planted a seed that would blossom in a way she could never have imagined. The cleaning shift in that enormous office building seemed endless to Senate. The low hum of the fluorescent lights was the only sound that broke the oppressive silence of the empty hallways. Her movements were automatic, scrubbing, mopping, vacuuming. But her mind was far away, trapped in the small studio she called home, and in Jonas's hurt expression. Every time she emptied a trash can or wiped a table, she relived the confrontation. His words echoed. You never let me do anything. She wondered, not for the first time, if her protection was, in fact, a prison. If the fear of losing him was, ironically, driving him away from her. The image of the elderly woman in the rain surfaced in her mind, a counterpoint of serene dignity amidst her inner turmoil. That woman was someone who, somehow, had survived all of life's storms, even if she was now under a broken awning. Did she also have a son? Had she too known nights of fear like this? Senate stared at her own pale, weary reflection in the dark windowpane of an office. She saw a woman hardened by necessity, whose hands, calloused by work, had forgotten the gentle touch. Did Jonas see her this way? Just as an obstacle to his desires? Doubt was a slow poison. She remembered her own youthful dreams in Asmara, the desires buried by war and escape. She didn't want that for Jonas. But how to balance hope with reality? How to allow him to fly without him falling off a cliff? The kindness she had shown the stranger seemed like an act of another person, a gentler version of herself she thought she had lost. Now, back in her reality, the old fear overwhelmed her again. She wiped her face with the back of her hand, feeling the rough texture of her skin. The blue uniform felt heavier than usual, like armor suffocating her. As the first ray of sunlight began to brighten the horizon, signaling the end of her shift, Senate felt more tired than when she had arrived. The night had been long not only because of work, but because of the silent battle waged in her heart. She gathered her things with deadly slowness, and went out into the gray dawn. The city was still quiet. The cold morning air bit her skin, but she barely felt it. All she wanted was to get home, see Jonas, and perhaps, if he was already awake, try to find the right words. Words that would say, "I love you," and "I'm scared" in the same sentence. Words that could build a bridge over the abyss she felt opening between them. On her way home, she passed the bus stop. It was empty. Only a small piece of light fabric, possibly from the woman's bag, was caught on the railing. Senate stopped for a moment, looking at that vestige. That small act of kindness seemed like a distant dream, an island of peace in a sea of anxiety. She moved forward, her heart heavy, carrying the weight of the night and the shadow of doubt that stubbornly refused to leave her. The morning light flooded the small studio when Senate arrived home, revealing every crack in the wall, every sign of poverty she tried to hide. Jonas was already awake, sitting at the table, pretending to read a book. The tension in the air was so thick you could cut it. "Good morning," she said, her voice hoarse with exhaustion. He didn't answer. He just turned a page with a dry click. Senate sighed inwardly. She poured herself a glass of water, her hands trembling slightly. "Jonas, we need to talk," she began, choosing each word with the care of someone treading on broken glass. "I understand you want to help. I understand you feel trapped." He finally looked at her, and what she saw in his eyes chilled her. It wasn't the frustration of the previous night anymore. It was a coldness, a distant determination that was foreign to her. "It doesn't matter anymore, Mother," he said, his voice flat. "I've made a decision." Senate's heart leaped. "What decision?" "I'm going to do those deliveries. Just for a while. To save some money." "No." The word came out as a scream, laden with all the panic she felt. "Jonas, it's dangerous. I don't know who this person is, I don't know what you'd be delivering. It could be anything. It could be drugs, weapons." "No." He stood up, the chair creaking on the floor. "You always think the worst. You always think I'm stupid, that I can't manage. This friend, he understands me. He said that many young immigrants do this. It's the only way to get a chance." "A friend you met on the internet?" "Jonas, please." She pleaded, approaching him, trying to reach his face with her hand. He stepped back. "It's my life, Mom. You can't control me forever." The argument exploded again, uglier, crueler than the first. Words were spoken that could not be forgotten. He accused her of not trusting him, of wanting to keep him poor and dependent. Desperate, she screamed about the dangers he couldn't see, about the darkness that could swallow him. That's when Jonas, his eyes filled with tears of rage, grabbed his jacket. "I'm leaving." "No. Jonas, please don't do this." She clung to his arm, but he pulled away forcefully. I'll be back later. And then, he opened the door and left. The door slammed shut with a final bang that echoed through Senet's soul. She stood paralyzed, staring at the wooden door, feeling as if the ground had disappeared beneath her feet. He was gone. Her boy, the center of her universe, had walked into the darkness of his own accord, driven by a desire she couldn't contain. She slid down the door to the floor, her body trembling uncontrollably. The tears finally came. They weren't silent tears, but a convulsive guttural sob, of a pain so deep it seemed to tear her apart from the inside. She had failed. Despite all her sacrifice, all her fear, all her love, she had failed to protect him. The darkness she so dreaded had entered not through the window, but through the front door, dressed in her own son's jacket. And now, she was alone on the cold floor, not knowing where he had gone, or if he would return. The sound of the traffic outside was the sound of an indifferent world, and Sinead felt smaller and more lost than ever in her life. The day passed in an agonizing blur for Sinead. She couldn't eat, she couldn't sleep. Every second Jonas was gone felt like an eternity of torture. She would sit at the table, staring at the door, then get up and go to the window, peering at the street activity, hoping to see the familiar silhouette approaching. Nothing. The simple cell phone they shared remained silent and menacing on the table. She tried calling his number countless times, but it went straight to voicemail. Jonas's recorded voice, nonchalant, saying, "Leave your message," was a stab in the back with each attempt. Where had he gone? Who was this friend? She imagined the worst scenarios. Jonas being arrested, Jonas being hurt, Jonas being dragged into a world of crime from which he couldn't escape. Guilt consumed her. Should she have been more understanding? Should she have listened more, shouted less? She reviewed the discussion dozens of times, each word a source of regret. The small studio, once her precarious refuge, had become a cell of anxiety. Jonas's few belongings, a pair of worn sneakers, an open math book on the table, were painful relics of a life that seemed to have crumbled in a matter of hours. The kindness she had shown the elderly woman the previous night seemed like a story from another life, a naive fairy tale. The reality was this: cold, harsh, and merciless. The sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, colors that would normally bring her a glimmer of peace. But that day, the sunset meant only that night was approaching. Night, when the dangers she so feared became real. When the shadows lengthened and concealed wicked secrets. Fear was a metallic taste in her mouth. She curled up on the mattress on the floor, wrapping herself in the thin blanket, trembling not from cold, but from terror. The sound of each passing car made her heart race, only to sink again when the noise faded. She prayed in her native tongue, whispered in broken words, begging God, every saint she could remember, to protect her son. To bring him back to her. She promised anything at all, if he returned safe and sound. Darkness fell completely, and the studio was plunged into twilight, illuminated only by the dim light of a street lamp outside. Sinead didn't turn on the lamp. She remained there, motionless, listening to the racing heartbeat in her ears, a frantic rhythm of terror. Each passing minute was a heavier burden. The silence was the worst of all. It was a silence that screamed, that whispered all her worst fears. She was losing hope. The image of Jonas, smiling and innocent, playing in the streets of a refugee camp, flashed through her mind, a painful contrast to the brutal uncertainty of the present. The dawn of a silent fear had given way to the darkest night of his life. The night had dragged on for hours, and Sinead, exhausted by the emotional strain, had fallen into a restless, shallow sleep on the mattress on the floor. Her dreams were a fragmented nightmare of closing doors, shadowy faces, and Jonas calling to her from an unreachable distance. Then a sound jolted her from her torpor. Knocking. 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 It wasn't Jonas's hesitant sound. It was firm, authoritative. Her heart raced, a mixture of wild hope and visceral fear. He was back. But why was he knocking like that? She jumped up so quickly her head spun and ran to the door, her body still heavy with sleep and anxiety. "Jonas!" she called, her voice trembling. She opened the door. And froze. It wasn't Jonas. Standing in the dimly lit hallway was a man. He was tall, wearing an elegant dark coat, and his face in the dim light was serious but not threatening. His sharp eyes watched her with an intensity that made her take a step back. Fear, now renewed and focused, enveloped her. This had to do with Jonas. Something had happened. Something terrible. Yes, she managed to say, her hand gripping the doorknob so tightly that her knuckles turned white. "Mrs. Senate?" the man asked, his voice calm and polite. She simply nodded, unable to form words. He then did something that surprised her. He bowed slightly, in an almost formal gesture of respect. "My name is Arthur. My mother, Ilara, is the lady you met at the bus stop last night. The lady you gave your tea and your gloves to." Senate froze, confused. She looked at the man, then at the empty hallway behind him, expecting, without knowing why, to see Jonas. What did this mean? Why was this man at her door in the middle of the night to talk about an act of kindness that seemed to have happened in another life? Yes, she stammered. "Is she all right?" Arthur smiled, a smile that reached his eyes, softening his features. "She's more than all right, thanks to you. She suffers from dementia, Mrs. Senate. Sometimes she wanders off. That night, she had left home and gotten lost. We were desperate. What you did, you not only warmed her up, you treated her with dignity. You kept her safe until we found her." His words slowly penetrated Senate's hazy mind. She didn't understand. It was a confusion. The elderly woman, dementia, they found her. And then, why was he here? To thank her? On a Sunday night? Something didn't make sense. She felt her legs weaken. "Thank you for telling me," she said, her voice weak. "But, please, have you seen my son? Jonas? He went out. He hasn't come back." Pain and worry overflowed, impossible to contain. Arthur watched her, and his expression changed. Seriousness returned, but now mingled with a profound understanding. He looked at her, at the small, empty studio behind her, at the despair etched on her face. He seemed to see much more than just a woman in the doorway. He seemed to see her struggle, her fear, her maternal pain. "Mrs. Senate," he said, his voice soft but firm. "May I come in? I think I can help you." Hesitantly, her heart pounding, Senate opened the door and let Arthur in. The studio seemed even smaller and more humble with his imposing presence. He didn't seem bothered. His eyes scanned the room quickly, without judgment, simply absorbing the reality of that life. Senate indicated the only chair, but he refused with a polite gesture, remaining standing. "Please sit down," he insisted, and she, feeling weak, obeyed, sinking onto the mattress on the floor. "You said that you could help me?" she asked, her voice a whisper full of hope and skepticism. Arthur nodded. "When my mother told us about you, about the soft-voiced woman with the beautiful accent who gave her own tea and the gloves that were clearly a personal treasure, we knew we had to find her. Not just to thank her, but to reciprocate." He paused, studying her face. "We've been looking for you. It was difficult. My mother saw you entering this building earlier today. She has her lucid moments. She insisted we come." Senate just shook her head, still not fully processing it. The story was incredible, almost a fairy tale. "Thank you," she said automatically. "But my son." Arthur raised his hand. "Let me be clear, Mrs. Senate. What you did was an act of pure humanity. In a city where many ignore others, you stopped. You cared. You gave what you had, which was your own comfort." He reached into his inside coat pocket and pulled out a letter. It wasn't an ordinary envelope. It was on thick, elegant paper. "My family is successful. We have a charitable fund, but this isn't charity. This is gratitude." He held out the letter to her. With trembling hands, Senate took it. She opened the envelope and pulled out a sheet of paper. Her eyes scanned the words, but her brain refused to comprehend. There was her name. And an amount. An amount that made her breath catch in her lungs. It was enough money to pay years of rent. Enough money for college tuition. Enough money to get them out of that nightmare life. I can't accept this," she stammered, tears welling up in her eyes. "This is too much." "It's not," Arthur said gently. "It's a thank you. A thank you for returning my mother safe and sound. A thank you for reminding us that kindness still exists." He then did something even more surprising. "And about your son. Jonas, isn't it? You said he left. Do you have a picture?" Confused, Sinead, with trembling fingers, picked up a faded photo of Jonas from the bedside table and handed it to him. Arthur looked at the photo, a recognition passing through his eyes. "He's 17? Tall, thin, blue jacket." Hope exploded in Sennett's chest like a rocket. "Yes. Yes. Did you see him?" Arthur picked up his phone. "Not exactly. But I know the kind of work young immigrants are recruited to do in those areas. Let me make a call." As Arthur dialed, Sinead sat, the miraculous letter pressed against her chest, her world turning upside down in a matter of minutes. The darkness began to recede, replaced by a beam of light so bright it was almost blinding. The minutes that followed Arthur's call were the longest of Sennett's life. He spoke with someone called Detective Miller, mentioning names, locations, an alleged delivery scheme that the police were already monitoring. His words were confident, efficient. He seemed like a man accustomed to making things happen. Sinead could barely breathe. She sat there, the miracle letter still pressed firmly against her heart, as if it were a talisman that could bring Jonas back to her. She prayed silently, repeating promises to the deity she had ignored for so long. Suddenly, Arthur's phone rang. He answered, listening intently. "I understand. Yes. She's with me. We're going there now." He hung up and turned to Sinead. His eyes were serious, but there was a glimmer of relief in them. "They found him. Jonas is safe. He was in a warehouse in the industrial district, about to make his first delivery. The police intervened in time. He's a little scared, but unharmed." A sound somewhere between a sigh and a sob escaped Sennett's lips. She covered her face with her hands, and the crying that followed was completely different from the despair of the previous night. It was a cry of overwhelming relief, of infinite gratitude, of 1,000-ton weight being lifted from her shoulders. She cried for all the fears, for all the sleepless nights, for all the pain of the journey. Arthur let her cry, his silent respect being the greatest comfort he could offer. After a few minutes, he gently suggested, "Shall we pick up your son?" The car ride to the police station was a dream. Sinead looked out the window. The city that had previously seemed hostile was now just a backdrop to a miracle. She couldn't believe it. The kindness she had offered, expecting nothing in return, had come back to her in a way that saved her son. It wasn't just the money. It was the intervention. It was the safety net that act of compassion had woven around her. When they arrived at the police station, Sinead practically jumped out of the car. She ran inside, and there, sitting on a bench, his face pale and shoulders slumped, was Jonas. He saw her and his eyes immediately filled with tears. "Mom!" he cried, standing up. They met in the middle of the room, and he clung to her, burying his face in her shoulder, trembling. "I'm so sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry. I didn't know. It was worse than I thought. They had guns." Sinead held him with all her might, whispering words of comfort in her native tongue, stroking his hair. She didn't scold him. There was no need. The fear in his eyes was punishment enough. The reunion was a storm of emotions, relief, guilt, forgiveness, a love so deep it hurt. Jonas was safe. He was back in her arms. At that moment, nothing else mattered. The letter in Sennett's pocket was important, yes, but it was secondary. The real treasure was there, trembling in her embrace. She glanced over Jonas's shoulder, and saw Arthur watching from afar, a discreet smile on his lips. He nodded and gestured that he would give them privacy. Sinead had no words to express her gratitude. All she could do was hold her son, knowing that the darkest night had finally passed, and a new dawn, brighter than she had ever dared to dream, was about to begin. The morning light that streamed into the small studio the next day was different. It was golden, warm, full of promise. Sinead woke to find Jonas fast asleep beside her on the mattress on the floor, his breathing a calm and comforting rhythm. For the first time in years, she didn't feel the crushing weight of anxiety as she opened her eyes. Instead, she felt a profound peace, a gratitude that permeated every fiber of her being. The letter was on the table, next to their photo. It was real. They had talked all night, mother and son. Jonas, shaken and remorseful, told her everything. About the online friend, about the empty promises, about the moment of pure terror in the warehouse when he realized what he was getting himself into. He asked for forgiveness, repeatedly. Sinead simply listened, held his hand, and forgave. There was no room for resentment in her heart, only immense relief and renewed determination. That terrible event had broken down the barriers between them. Jonas finally understood his mother's fear, not as unfounded overprotection, but as deep love and an instinctive awareness of danger. And Sinead understood his desire to grow, to contribute, not to be a burden. With Arthur's generosity, a door they thought had been locked forever had opened. In the days that followed, Arthur didn't disappear. He became a kind of guardian angel. He connected Jonas with a youth mentoring program where he could intern at a legitimate tech company. He helped Sinead find an accelerated English course and enroll in a refugee empowerment program. The money wasn't a check to be spent impulsively, but a foundation. They moved into a one-bedroom apartment with windows that let in the sun and a bathroom that wasn't shared with 5 other apartments. It was an unimaginable luxury. A month later, Sinead and Jonas were invited to dinner at Arthur and his mother Alara's house. The elderly woman, in one of her lucid moments, recognized Sinead immediately. Her eyes lit up, and she held Sinead's hands, murmuring, "My child," repeatedly. It was a night of stories, laughter, and tears of joy. 2 completely different worlds met and intertwined through a single act of kindness. Sitting at the table, watching her son chatting animatedly with Arthur about technology, and Mrs. Alara smiling peacefully, Sinead felt an emotion she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. A concrete, tangible hope. Their journey wasn't over. There were still challenges ahead, studies, adjustments. But the constant fear had dissipated. The shadow that hung over them had been replaced by light. And Sinead knew, deep in her heart, that this new chapter of their lives wasn't written solely by the generosity of a stranger, but by a choice she herself had made on a rainy night. The choice not to turn away. The choice to offer a little warmth in a cold world. And in that simple act, she not only warmed a stranger, she finally found a way to warm her own future. The weight of dawn had transformed into the lightness of a new beginning.